Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of Introduction to Asset Management Online Solutions Dialogue for Asia Pacific. This virtual workshop is brought to you by UNDESA, UNCDF, and UNOPS. Let's quickly review the important Zoom functions you should take note of as you participate in today's workshop. So again, like yesterday, we have simultaneous interpretations available for this morning. We have a channel for English to Bangla translations and English to Nepali translations. To choose your preferred language, click on the interpretation button on your Zoom panel, which you will find right beside the chat button. Your Zoom will have to be updated for this to work. It has to be updated to the latest version. In case you're not able to access interpretations, we recommend that you update your Zoom first. Again, we'd like to invite everyone to use the chat by introducing yourself this morning. Just send in your name, country, and government agency so everyone can know you and to get the discussion started. And again, for any thoughts and questions, feel free to maximize the chat window. Send your messages to the chat and our team will do our best to get back to you for important concerns, and trust that we're taking note of all your comments. So for today's opening remarks, we have messages from two offices who played truly an essential part to make this online solutions dialogue happen. First up is Mr. David Jackson, Local Development Finance Director at UNCDF.
Welcome to the UNDESA and UNCDF Asset Management Handbook and the course associated with it. Asset management is a critical feature of infrastructure finance in developing countries and one which is often neglected. A little known fact is that 80% of the infrastructure cost to the local authority is post-construction, post-procurement. And so whilst there's a lot of talk about the need to build projects, to bring in blended finance, to develop cities, etc., what is often left behind is the management of those assets once they are established. However, asset management should not only be seen as a cost, it is also an opportunity for income. Well-managed assets can actually increase fiscal space. They can provide leverage for further investments, and they can repay the investment, the initial investment, many times over. Furthermore, asset management is a key feature of the citizen-state relationship at the local level. When people think of government or their government, they often think of publicly owned features such as parks, schools, hospitals, transport systems, lighting systems, water, electricity, etc. So when these assets are well managed, people tend to think, well, government is working. When they're not well managed, they think government is not working. And this is interestingly the case for central government, even though local government does the managing. So it's often good for central government to make sure their local governments are capacitated to manage the assets, because central government benefits from that wider recognition and citizen satisfaction. And of course, a satisfied citizen is willing to contribute more and better place to build the economy and contribute in tax revenue. So all around, asset management is a fundamental feature of development and of progress. And in terms of building the SDGs and moving towards the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, asset management is not a topic that often comes to mind, but actually is a fundamental prerequisite for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, of course, asset management is something that has a long lead-in time. And the infrastructure of 2030 will not be built in 2030. It's being built now. It's being planned now. Infrastructure finance, infrastructure management has a long lead-in periods. What is being planned and being financed now is what will be coming on stream in 2030. So if you like, when it comes to asset management, 2030 is now. Now is the time to get our act together, to build our capacity in asset management, to build our local fiscal space, to build confidence in the citizen, and to contribute very positively to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, building climate resilience, climate adaptation, and sustaining our future on this planet. So for those of you that came to this course thinking that asset management might be boring, it's far from that. It is actually a key element to securing our future. So you should be very proud and happy to be on this course. And please do read the handbook. And many, many thanks to the colleagues at UNDESA and the whole UNCDF team for this wonderful collaboration in the context of the United Nations contribution to financing for development. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome. Welcome to.
And now we have Mr. Nick O'Regan, Implementation Practices and Standards Director at UNOPS. Nick, over to you.
The UNDESA
Infrastructure is at the heart of sustainable development. Infrastructure touches every aspect of human life, from the roads we drive on and the mobile networks that connect us, to the delivery of the water we drink and the electricity that lights up our homes. It connects people with services, provides opportunities, and protects lives and livelihoods. In fact, our research together with the University of Oxford shows that infrastructure influences 92% of all the targets across the Sustainable Development Goals. Robust infrastructure systems are therefore essential for nations to thrive and governments to achieve their development objectives locally, nationally, as well as internationally. But governments face numerous challenges in the planning, delivery, and management of their infrastructure systems. And this hinders the provision of sustainable, resilient, and inclusive services for all citizens. So it's crucial to work in partnership with governments to enhance their capacity to improve the quality, performance, and the value of their infrastructure systems, whilst minimizing life cycle costs and risks to meet both present and the future needs for all. UNOPS has a central mandate in infrastructure. We support our partners address these infrastructure challenges. Together with our partners, UNDESA and UNCDF, we aim to support government deliver on their development goals by helping them to manage their infrastructure assets and systems more effectively. The UN Handbook on Infrastructure Management and these open solutions dialogues are a great resource in this regard. They offer practical guidance and adaptable tools that support local and national governments to manage infrastructure assets effectively. One example you will find in the handbook illustrates how UNOPS worked hand in hand with the Bangladesh Local Government Engineering Department to co-create an approach that better and more sustainably managed assets, and one that is aligned with the highest of international standards. The result of this collaboration demonstrates that we don't always need new software or processes. Sometimes what we need is organizational change and improved practices and procedures. Together, we can build a better future through sustainable, resilient, and inclusive infrastructure.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. David Jackson and Mr. Nick O'Regan, for the wonderful messages. And now, without further ado, let's move on. And we'd like to introduce Linda Newton, our lead instructor for today's workshop. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Juana, and welcome back, everybody. It's good to see all of you this morning, and we're glad that you're back to join us for day 2 of our workshop. Today, we're going to be looking at chapters 3 and 4 of the handbook. We'll be looking at the asset management framework and the enabling environment, and then we'll be looking at the tools that were developed to help you move forward. But before we do, let's just take a quick look at what we talked about yesterday. So yesterday, we learned about the asset management lifecycle and the 4 phases of that, from planning from our assets all the way through to acquiring them and using them and disposing of them. And we looked at these 3 pillars of asset management and how they support the activities that we do in each of those 4 phases. Now, today we're going to bring that all together and look at what do we need to have in place. So we talked a little bit about the skeleton. We're going to talk about how we make this happen through our policies and our legislation and other asset management tools. So let's start with a question. If you remember, we talked about this yesterday, and we're going to put up a link for into Mentimeter. And I would like you to answer the question, and we'll see what pops up on our screen. Why do we have the assets we have? Why are they there? Why do we have the assets we have? So Juana is going to put our link up in our chat. The same process as yesterday. Click on the link, and it will give you the opportunity to type in why you think we have the assets we have. And we'll see what pops up on our screen today. So you can see the link in the chat. Let's click on that link. We'll have about a minute or so just to get your answers to pop up, and we'll see what people think. Ooh, public service. Okay, some coming in. Necessity. Connectivity. Okay. For our own service. Economic benefit. Delivery of public services. Again, so we're starting to see that social aspect of why we have assets. Again, they're programmed based on a strategic plan, and we'll be talking a little bit today about strategic planning. What do our strategic plans say about the assets that we have? And we're seeing desired services, life support. So I'm pleased to see that there's a theme here of service delivery and a societal benefit to our citizens, sustainable living and sustainability. We've heard a little bit about that with both of our 2 introductory speakers this morning. Yeah. Business incubator, interesting. And fulfilling the requirements of our citizens, improving the lives of our community. So you can see, I'm really glad to see this answers that are coming up here. We've looked at meeting community needs and expectations, delivering services to our citizens, or meeting strategies in our plans. And these are some of the key elements of why we have the assets that they have. Ideally, within our community, we have a long-term goal and we have a long-term vision, and our assets align with that. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we've looked at our fundamentals for asset management. What we're going to do today I've mentioned, is we're going to look at what I call the big picture. So how do all of these pieces of our puzzle come together? From our national legislation and policies to asset management specific legislation, and then how do they inform what we do right down at the level where we actually have those assets? And so we'll talk about something called an asset management framework. We'll learn what that is and how that helps us. And then we'll look very briefly at those enablers. Okay? So we have our big picture, we have our direction, we have our guidance, we have this framework that gives us support. How do we then make that happen? What are those enablers? The tools, the people, the resources, and we'll touch very briefly on those as well. So let's start off by looking at our big picture. Okay. Now, don't be alarmed if this is new to you. And if it looks confusing and it looks overwhelming, you're not alone. Municipalities, whether they're large or small the world over, look at this and they go, oh my goodness, how do I make the connections between all of these? Okay? How do I, at the national level, I have accountability acts and I have procurement acts and I have an anti-corruption act or a budget act. And then I have to worry about the land use act, a water supply. And then at my local government level, I have a community vision I need to think about and economic development. And then I have my own assets that I need to think about. So we're going to take this big picture and we're going to dissect it. Okay? We're going to look at each one of these in turn so that we can see how they work together to give us that direction. So let's start by looking at legislation. Now, if you remember, your homework yesterday was to think about what legislation and guidance and directives you have in your municipalities. And what we see at the highest level, as I've already mentioned, and we saw this yesterday when I asked you about what do you have that is legislation in the planning phase or the use phase. We have these procurement, we have a procurement act, we have an accountability act. Very few countries, in fact, there's only one to the best of my knowledge. Uganda is now working on an asset management act, but South Africa created a government immovable asset management act in 2007. And no other country, at least as a result of my search just a couple of weeks ago, because I keep checking, has an act. Uganda has developing an act that they want to put in place. But what we do rely on is sort of legislation that further defines those roles and responsibilities. Land use, of how tenure might be assigned for land. And so these documents can also establish the basic levels of service provision. So let's take a look at those. We have at our national level procurement and anti-corruption. And then we have our specific policies and strategies and possibly legislation that is more asset focused. And you can see some of them here, so when we looked at our big picture, we saw that. Now, the Government Act, many countries have a local government act, and that defines the roles and responsibilities of what you need to do at that local government level. It talks about what you can do, what you can't do, where responsibilities lie between the different levels of government. And it may also define broad service areas. So who is responsible for education or healthcare, community roads? Perhaps you're in a country where you have a district and the district is responsible for roads within your district, or you have a province. And at the community level, you're just responsible for roads that connect small residential areas within your community. So the legislation will tell us why we do certain things. Policies will tell us what is to be done. So we could have a land use act, or we could have a land use policy. And they can be quite general to various government departments. Okay? We could also have, they could also be very specific to departmental operations, for example. And at this level, with the policy and the strategy, we also may have standards and directives and guidelines that will help us. So let's take a small Zoom poll at the moment. Let's see what you have in your countries. Okay? We're going to put up a poll, and as you can see here, what national legislation do you have policies for? So if you thought about this last night with your homework, let's see, I'll expand this a little bit, but we've got nine areas here. So do you have legislation for accountability, procurement, asset management, financial management? Do you have an environmental act or land use or development? Asset valuation. Do you have a valuation policy? Some of you spoke yesterday that valuation was a challenge. Do you have a data or information gathering policy or standard, or health and safety? So we'll take a couple of minutes to give everybody a chance, because there are a lot of options here for you to click on. Okay, so what I'm seeing at the moment, with just over half of the people responding, is a lot of like, you have a procurement act in your countries. That seems to be leading the way. The next closest would be an accountability act. And land use or land development. Some of you may not know if you have these acts, and that's all right too. I teach an organization within my Canadian government, and when I go and I deliver a workshop, I have many people that don't know that the reason they are there are because all of these acts and this legislation exists, and they're not aware that it's there to help them manage their assets. So it's not unique for us not to know what is there. Right, so let's take a look. We'll end our poll, and I'll share the poll. So we had about 41%, about half of you believe you have a procurement act, an accountability act also, and then land use and development. And those are certainly the common acts and regulations that we would see. Financial management would be another one. And environment. Many countries would have an environmental act. But just as we see here, very few have asset valuation or data or information gathering or asset management. That is what we see in many countries around the world. So what we're seeing in our poll results is not all that surprising. So let's look at these. Sustainability, I forgot to mention sustainability. Some organizations or some countries are now developing a sustainability policy. So let's move on then. And this is an example of what Nepal and Bangladesh have, two of the countries that were part of our study. So you can see here, I've just selected some of them because there are quite a few, but we can see that there is some commonality between the two. Again, a Public Procurement Act, which reflects what everybody noted. But in Nepal, for example, there's an Electricity Act or a Public Roads Act, whereas in Bangladesh, they're policies. So they're not pieces of legislation. But, Nepal, interestingly, has a needs assessment and a financing strategy for sustainable development. And we're going to take a very brief look at that in a moment. So let's now look at our third quadrant. We'll look at local government. And local government is now taking that direction from higher up and looking at what is the vision and what is the development goal for the community. And this is where you will have a community strategy. Okay? There may be a community, a town vision. If you have something such as sustainable development goals, and I've got a picture up here of the Nepal Sustainable Development Goals, you are looking at that type of direction and say, how does that apply to my community? And what do I need to do? Which brings us to our last quadrant, and that is asset management policy and strategy within our community. So we are now taking that direction and saying, what do we need to do for land use? What do we need to have in terms of operations? Do we need to have guidelines? Do we need to have policies? Do we need a capital planning policy? Asset management. We have our sustainable development strategy that gives us targets for water, for basic water supply. What do we do with that? If you look at the sustainable development goals from the Addis Ababa agenda, how does that translate down to what we're going to do at our local municipalities? So we start to look at this, and now you can see how they all become connected. We should, whatever we are doing at our local level, if it it has to have some link to what our community wants us to do and what direction we're getting from our national government. So another question for you. We're going to put Mentimeter up again. And the question I want you to ask is, what local government asset management policies or guidelines do you have in your communities? So you can see the link to Mentimeter is in the chat. Do you have an environmental policy in your community? Do you have a development policy in your community? Do you have inspection guidelines or a condition assessment policy or an operations policy? So what do you have? Let's see if we have any responses. We may not get any. We'll see. Oh, okay. So now remember, here we're looking at what you have at your local level, okay? Not national, but at the local government level. Do you have any local government policies and guidelines that are very specific to asset management? So here we go. So we've had, someone has prepared a SAMP, a Strategic Asset Management Plan. Excellent. Construction standards in Qatar. Again, those would possibly come from the national level. Also, operations policy. Yeah, good to see. A data management policy. Oh, that's very exciting. When we, I hope whoever has entered that will comment on that in the chat when we get to our data section. That is very rare to see. Oh, so okay. The regulations on land management. So typically at our local level, we will see operational policies. We will have a land use plan perhaps for our municipality, and we will see that. Yep, land use policy. What we may have at that local level, and we're going to be looking into this, some of you did mention it, is an asset management strategy. And we'll look at what that means a bit later on. So what I want you to take away from this is how all of these elements come together to provide us direction. And if you are learning for the first time, or this is getting you to think for the first time about national acts or national legislation, then hopefully when you go back, you'll take a look at what is there. And because there could be good information in there, not just information, there could be direction that you have to follow certain standards or certain procedures. So we've looked at this big picture. We've looked at what I'd like to call the skeleton, the policies, the guidance, the direction, the why and the what. So we then bring this together, and where we lack at our local level in those asset management policies and directions is where our asset management framework comes in. And our asset management framework, again, just think of this as a skeleton, something that helps us implement asset management in a really well-coordinated fashion. And at the top, we start with our policy. Okay? And our asset management framework guides the activities that we're going to do so that we can realize the value from those assets. Okay? And this is a figure that comes out of the Asset Management Handbook. So the policy tells us what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. And then the plans and the directions will tell us how. Our strategic asset management plan. It will take what is in the policy and identify our levels of service, identify our risks, identify where we're going to put our focus on our assets. And then we have our three pillars that we saw yesterday of demand management, life cycle management, and financial management. Okay? And those help us ensure that we take a consolidated approach to what we're going to do, and that we look at our demand, we think about managing our assets over our life cycle, and then we have the right finances in place to ensure we can do that. And then we have what we call enablers. And so this is where our asset management information system comes in. Our asset management leadership, our teams, okay? Service procurement. And once we have all of these elements together, then ideally our operations can run smoothly. We can plan for our operations. So let's look at our framework in a little bit more detail. Our asset management policy. Okay. So our asset management policy lays out the general principles and requirements for asset management. As I've mentioned, it's telling us what and it's telling us why. Does that link to our local government strategic plan? So if our local government has decided that we're going to be developing in a particular area, or perhaps we're going to have a satellite city, and that's part of the development plan, then our asset management policy wants to reflect that we are supporting that and we're supporting our municipality's vision. And there'll be an asset management vision and goals. So what are we expecting from our assets? And what levels of service are we going to provide? And what's really important about a policy is it's written in good, clear language that people can understand. I'd like to say to people, when you're writing a policy, the best way to know if it's a good policy, if you can give that to the person that perhaps is operating one of your vehicles, collecting your garbage or your refuge, or you can give that to someone that's maintaining your water treatment plant and they can understand your policy and it means something to them, then that's a good policy. We have our goals as part of our policy, and we have principles. And what do we mean when we talk about principles? So I mentioned it's a principles, requirements, and objectives. So typical objectives might be, we're going to have a community focus, and we'll involve and inform the public in our long-term planning, or we'll be risk-based. We'll take a life cycle management approach to how we manage our assets. We'll have a focus on service. We will be customer-centric. And so these are what we would call our objectives. And then the principles would be how we're going to do that. So if we say one of our objectives is having a community focus, the principle would be we will involve and inform our public in our long-term planning. Or if we say we're going to be a forward-looking municipality, then one of our principles would be we will focus on long-term solutions rather than short-term affordability. And then within our asset management policy, we will refer to other supporting policies. And this could be our land use policies. It could be our environmental policy that we have at our local level. And the final key element of our policy is our asset management roles and responsibilities. So we're identifying who is responsible for doing certain activities. So the principles establish how we will do something. Those objectives are establishing where we want to go. And then we clearly understand who is going to be responsible for getting us there. Our asset management direction then comes through this asset management plan. Okay. And the asset management plan will talk about our levels of service. Okay. How are we going to, or what are we going to achieve? We will have different levels of service for different types of assets. And we saw some of those yesterday. So the strategy. Well, what is an asset management strategy? Our asset management strategy is sort of a high-level action plan, if you like. It needs to align, as I've mentioned, with our local strategy. So if your community has a local strategic plan, your asset management strategy needs to align with that. If your local community is saying that we want to develop a satellite city, then your asset management strategy will be talking about ensuring that we have assets that will be able to service those satellite cities, that our assets will support the development in this particular area. It doesn't go into the day-to-day detail of operations, but it gives a good idea of what you are going to do, of sort of a 15 to 20 year time frame or horizon. Yeah. And this is where you'll be looking at your demand management. We might be forecasting future service delivery needs or summarize major initiatives that we're going to be doing within our community. Again, you might just focus on some of the resources and the roles and the responsibilities for asset management. And within that strategy, you might talk about the systems you're going to use to measure and monitor performance. So the two key elements, again, we'll have this vision, we'll have goals and objectives. So I have a question for you now, a quick poll. Does your local government have a strategic plan or an asset management strategy? So we're looking at sort of 50-50 at the moment as to whether yes or no, whether we have one or not. What I would be interested to know in the chat is if you have a strategic plan, do you have an asset management strategy? Because this question asks you if you have one or the other. And I'm going to make the assumption that more often people will have a strategic plan, but they probably don't have an asset management strategy. We'll just give everyone a couple more minutes. Oh, excellent. So Emily has noted that they don't have an asset strategy, but they're working on developing one. So let's stop our polling. We can see that it's fairly evenly split, but a slight majority don't have a strategic plan or an asset management strategy. And so that is something that you don't need to have a strategic plan without having your asset management strategy, but it's certainly something you want to work hand in hand with in a community so that you're not going off in one direction and council are going in another direction. So we talked about the strategy. Now let's talk very briefly about the asset management plan. So the asset management plan further details those activities that you're going to take. And quite often an asset management plan will be broken down by service area. So within that plan, we'll talk about water provision or roads, or perhaps an asset category such as land or equipment. And within that asset management plan, we identify what those levels of service are going to be. So if I can use water distribution again as an example, we might have our levels of service where within the central business district that we will pipe water to our citizens. With our next ring, we might have community distribution points. Again, the water is piped to a community distribution point. And as we go further out from the city center, then we might rely on wells or boreholes, or we might rely on community distribution points, but it is not piped to that point. And so those are different levels of service. We identify that in our asset management plan, and we would identify our performance measures. So are we going to have treated water, untreated water? What percentage would that be? When would we reach a certain target by? And as I've mentioned, you can see here, the asset management plan is complemented by other plans. And probably the most critical plan that would complement the asset management plan is a land use development plan. Now, quite often, I've seen Sam here in the chat, these two can be combined. So you can take your asset management plan and combine it with your strategy. And what we would have is, we call it a strategic asset management plan. So it's bringing everything together into one place. So you don't have two documents, you have one. And what you see in front of you is a typical table of contents for a strategic asset management plan. And you can see that the strategy is embedded in that plan. The levels of service are embedded in the plan. And another element of your SAMP is your financing strategy. So you're talking about why you need your assets, what types of assets you need, what the levels of service are that they're going to deliver, what the strategy is for those assets, and then how you are going to fund that and where you expect these funds possibly to go, or where you might be pursuing funds. So that's our asset management framework and the key elements of our framework. Now we're going to touch on the enablers. How do we make all of this happen? It's great to have policies, it's great to have plans, but if we don't have people, and we don't have technology, and we don't have the resources, they're going to be just that. They're going to be plans that sit on the table. So people. People are probably the most important aspect of asset management. Not probably, they are the most important aspect of asset management. And that starts with having an asset management champion or a focal point in your local government. And this is the person that promotes asset management. They get it, and they make sure other people get what asset management is about. You could have an asset management team that are comprised of key personnel from the various service areas, for example. And again, it's making that case of why asset management is so important and talking about the services that asset delivers. And it's also getting support from local council and senior management. So asset management isn't a, yay, look, we have a strategic asset management plan, we put it on our shelf and we forget about it. It's a continuous activity that we have to keep doing. So people, they have to be competent, they have to be trained and dedicated. A technology will not manage your assets for you. What technology will do will enable asset management. But if you remember our 6 whats yesterday, if you don't know what you have and where it is and what its condition is, if you don't know what information, what data you need, and what information you need from that data, all the technology in the world isn't going to help you. So it's very important that you understand what information you need to manage those assets. Then you can think about the assessment tools, whether they're simple spreadsheets, whether they're maps, whether it's a database that can help you get there. And then finally, the resources. What equipment do you need to maintain your assets? What material do you need to maintain your assets? So we're going to come and do a breakout exercise. Okay? We've talked about the big picture. We've talked about our asset management framework. We've talked about some of the enablers. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and it's the same procedure as yesterday. I'd like you to introduce yourself. I'm going to go over the question here in a moment. And then within your breakout room, answer the exercise. And again, pick one person to be your reporter, and then summarize your discussion on the form that's provided in the chat, the link that's in there. So in our breakout exercise, we're going to pretend that we are going to work on developing our asset management strategy for Supertown. So each of you now lives in the community of Supertown. And Supertown's a medium-sized municipality, about 250,000 people. It has a lot of day traders who come into the city and then they leave at night. So they're using services during the day, but that does put a strain on city services. But Supertown, as you can see, is on this beautiful lake, and they want to start to encourage and support tourism. So Supertown's strategy is that it's going to be a strong community, a well-planned community, and open to all. And they've started to work on their asset management objectives. And so here are 3 examples that they've started to work on. Your colleagues have said, well, as a strong community, we're going to build community partnerships. If we're going to be a well-planned community, an objective is to accommodate growth. If we're going to be open to all, we need to have equal access to all. So your task is to come up with 3 more objectives for Supertown. So you could have 2 that go under strong community, 1 under planned. You could have 1 under each one. It doesn't matter. But use the examples that you see in front of you and come up with 3 more asset management objectives for Supertown. So we're starting to develop Supertown's asset management strategy. So we're going to be placed into breakout rooms again. And as with yesterday, our UN Ops colleagues and UN DESA colleagues will pop into the rooms to help you if you need assistance. And we will have about 15 minutes for this activity. Okay, we'll bring everybody back. And we'll, as with yesterday, I will call on some groups to share what they did. So Juana, if we can break everyone out, that would be great. All right,
Now,
everybody. Hopefully we have everybody back in, and we didn't have too many difficulties with our breakout rooms. I was monitoring your discussions as you were entering your responses into the form, and some really good objectives that were coming out. So I'd like to call on breakout room number 26, and it was Nanu Kadka. Nanu, if you could ask to unmute yourself and share with us the 3 objectives. I realize the exercise asked you for 5 objectives, so those of you that came up with 5 on the form, kudos to you, but 3 is absolutely fine. So Nanu, if you could share your objectives that your group developed.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you very much for the session. And I would also like to thank my team in the breakout room for such cooperation and such good ideas. And we have come up with the 3 strategies for the super town. Those are clean environment, tourism promotion, and food security. So under these strategies, we have also developed some objectives, which also I would like to brief here. Under clean environment, we have healthy community, solid and liquid waste management, and water and sanitation. Similarly, under tourism promotion, we have VAT reimbursement for the tourists, accessible foreign exchange, good accommodation, and hospitality. And similarly, under food security, we have some objectives such as easy access of drinking water, promotion of local food products in affordable prices. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. It sounds like you had quite a good discussion in your group. Thank you for sharing with us. And I'd like to, if room 24, Masad Ali Chowdhury was your rapporteur. Masad, if you want to unmute yourself and share what your group came up with for your asset management objectives. Go ahead, Masad, if that's you that's unmuted.
Hello, I am listening to you. Local government level and municipal level asset management is very crucial and important for sustainable development. I think that in local government, they should a long-term asset management plan, including their sustainable use and to reduce their depreciation in their assets and utilize more this asset to more social benefit. For this reason, I think that local government, especially municipality, they should emphasis on their sustainable use and this asset to environment friendly use because I am reside in a tourist city in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and a lot of tourists came in this city every day. And I think that local municipality, they should planning to their asset management on considering this their tourism management and ecotourism aspects. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So we heard thank you for sharing and for having a great discussion in your group as well. So here we heard a different theme of the concept of sustainability as well. So if Supertown is going to encourage tourism and support tourism, then we want to make sure that's done in a sustainable manner. So the objective of this exercise was to get you to think about, how do you connect those asset management objectives to a community strategy that you may have. So you start to see what those links are. What does a strong community mean from an asset management perspective? What does a well-planned community mean from an asset management perspective, or open to all from an asset management perspective? And so we heard themes about sustainability, food security, access, the types of assets that we might need to support the vision that we would like to have for as a tourism community. So what I want you to take away from this particular workshop, this session, when we looked at the enabling environment, is we need to understand that big picture. We need to understand, as I've said, what the national direction is, what guidance is being given to us from the national direction. We're not in this alone, we're in a journey together. And that guidance gives us local direction guidance. And from that, we can create that asset management framework that gives us the tools to better manage our assets. It helps us form that plan. so that we can decide what our risks are, so we can decide what assets we're going to manage, so that we can decide how we best spend the money that we have, because we know we will never, ever have enough money. So we have to spend what we do have wisely. If you think of asset management in many ways of how you just live your daily life, very few of us are in that position that we have an infinite amount of resources and funding to live our lives. And so we make decisions every day. We make risks every day. So if you want to, you can draw that analogy to your own life, to asset management, because it is all about what is that plan and how do we do the most with what we have and benefit or balance those costs and those benefits. So thank you for your attention for this session. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will be back to look at instruments for asset management and what tools have we developed that will help you beyond just the guide, the handbook, to take that asset management journey and perhaps start improving even just one of your assets. So what if we could have our clock up, and we'll see everybody back here in 5 minutes. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back. Oh, good. Want to make sure that I'm not muted. I forgot to unmute myself yesterday. So welcome back to our final session of our Asia Pacific Asset Management Online Solutions Delivery. And as I mentioned before our break, in our very last session, we're going to have a look at two tools that have been developed by UNDASA. So the first is the diagnostic tool, which helps you assess where you are at in your asset management journey. And the second is the asset management action plan that puts you on that path to developing a plan to better manage one of your, or perhaps more than one, of your key assets. So before we start, I know that some of you here have actually had an assessment by our UNDASA team and have gone through the diagnostic tool process. So I'm going to pop up a quick poll just to get a sense of who is online that has already been exposed to the diagnostic tool. So if you have had an assessment by the UNDASA team, and when I talk about the diagnostic tool, it means something to you, then that would be yes. And so if you're in Nepal, it could have been by Mohan, or it could have been by Bidan if you're in Bangladesh. It gives me an idea of how many people that are coming back that know all about this, and I could possibly call on you. Okay. So it looks like the majority of you, there's a few that are online that have been in municipalities that were part of the workshops that we did, and we're part of having had that assessment. But for the most part, most people have not had a diagnostic tool assessment. So that's actually quite good, because you are the ones that will benefit the most from this. And for those of you that have had an assessment, you could perhaps go back and assess yourselves and see where you feel that you lie. So just do a quick share of the results. As you can see, most people that are online have not been exposed to the diagnostic tool. So let's begin by taking a look at it. The diagnostic tool, what is it? It's what we aim to do with the diagnostic tools is apply some of the principles of asset management that we've discussed, so that as an organization, you can take stock of where you're at. And we've tried the tool in 4 different countries now, and we've refined it as we've gone along. So why did we want to do it in the first place? Well, if we look back at what we talked about in terms of asset management objectives yesterday, and that level of the required level of service in the most cost-effective manner, and the 3 words I keep saying about the right assets in the right place. Well, the objectives of the diagnostic tool are to help you understand what those asset management objectives are. So it's not only is it designed as a form of assessment, but it sort of introduces that concept of asset management. And it's a simple means to assess where you're at. And the term awareness is used because it's all about developing that level of awareness of what is involved in asset management, both from a basic level all the way up to a full-blown, really good, deep understanding of what asset management involves. And based on that, there are recommendations that will then help you improve local asset management. And we'll look through the various steps of the tool in a moment. But one of the key elements that comes out of it are recommending interventions. And then these can be used as a basis for developing those action plans that we're going to be talking about in the second part of this presentation. So what is it? We've created this diagnostic tool. Do we just dream it up one day? No. It's based on 3 documents. So the first is the ISO 55000 Asset Management Standard. Some of you may or may not be aware of. The other key document that forms part of the diagnostic tool is the International Infrastructure Management Manual, 2015. We created the diagnostic tool in 2017, and that manual is now in, there's a new version that's come out, 2021, and it is also a very good manual. And then the structure of the tool is based on something that was developed by the government of New Zealand for their asset management maturity assessment. So these three documents together are what informed how we developed the tool. And there's some interesting things about it. We wanted to be sure that it could be done through a formal assessment where a team would come in and do an assessment with you, or you could also use it as a self-assessment or as a health check to see where you're at. So after you've done this online solutions dialogue, or perhaps you've been part of one of our asset management workshops that have been longer in time, you can go and do a health check to see where you're at and what your awareness of asset management is. Now, as I mentioned, there are three parts to the tool. The first part is a self-assessment. And the objective of the self-assessment is to get your organization, your local government, thinking about asset management. And it's a series of 11 questions that you answer, starting with how many people do you have in your municipality? What is your population, both in the daytime or at nighttime? Because you could have an influx of citizens or people that come in during the day that put a huge demand on services without necessarily paying taxes or paying for those services. And that's important to know. You're asked about what your key assets are. What types of assets do you have? What are your critical assets? Who is responsible for looking after your assets? And one of the questions is, do you know what the legislation or the guidelines or the directives are that help you manage those assets? So these 11 questions will take you through that journey if you've never thought about asset management, to think about it at a fairly high level. And so this questionnaire is aimed at perhaps your section heads or your department heads or the chief administration officer, the COW, to have a really good look and think about what their assets are. And as you can see, the types of participants would range from the medical officers, perhaps the information officer. These are the types of individuals that responded to this questionnaire with the 4 countries that participated. And 2 of those 4 countries are, we have people online here tonight, or this morning, excuse me, for you, like from Bangladesh and Nepal. You could have head of procurement and a development officer, but it's very important to get a broad range of people. That was one of the reasons why I asked you yesterday, where were people coming from? Because asset management isn't a financial exercise. It's not an engineering exercise. It's not a land use development exercise. Everybody is in that boat and we're all rowing together. And so it's good to get that broad understanding so that everybody knows what the other person's role is in asset management. So the next part of the assessment is an on-site assessment. And it comprises a series of 14 questions based around understanding and defining requirements. And again, part of that demand pillar, life cycle decision making, and then asset management enablers. So do you know what you need to be doing? Are you doing that over the full life cycle of your assets? And then what are those enablers in place? We talked about those in our very last session, where we talked about people and tools and systems that help us. And so the questions also come with an explanation and with examples of what a good practice looks like, what's a best practice. And the person conducting the assessment will talk to the various individuals in the municipality and write down the answers in the column, make notes. And it's also very important during that you may be asked to show what you do. So if you say you have an asset inventory and, oh yes, we collect this information and this information, as part of that assessment, you'll be asked, well, could you show me your asset register? What does your asset register look like? If you have a system, can I see your system? So this is an example of one of the assessments that we did in a municipality. And there are in the handbook, there are some more detailed examples that you can look at if you do have difficulty seeing it on the screen here. So part 2, on-site assessment, really taking you through these 14 questions. Part 3 is the evaluation. And again, as I've mentioned, it's about awareness. And so these 4 evaluation levels, excuse me, range from basic. So you've heard about asset management, but you really haven't been able to put it into practice yet. ranging all the way up to it's quite advanced, and you've been doing this for a very long time, and you're doing it throughout all of your activities. And I can honestly stand here and say, I have not encountered a municipality yet that is at the advanced level. Okay? Most tend to be between a 2 and a 3. Many are at a 1 and a 2, and they could aim towards a 3. And so what will happen next is in part 3 is the assessor will look at the answers that were given and look at the information that was provided, and then we'll go away and score your answers from, for these 14 questions, anywhere from 0.5 to a maximum of 4. Okay? That's it. And then the other element of this evaluation, as we're going to see, is it gives you the opportunity, in fact, I'll click to the next slide. It gives you the opportunity to look at where you could be. So you can, the awareness level is scored, and that's a pointed time now. And then the assessor has the opportunity, there's another column that says target score. So where does that assessor think you could be in a short period of time? We're not talking about 5 to 10 years, we're talking about 2 to 3 years. And based on that, the assessor will give a target score, put down the reasons for the scores. So why was that score given, and why does the assessor think that you could be a 3 if you're currently, say, a 1.5 in that area? And then document the evidence to support that score. And then the final part of the assessment is to recommend interventions. So what could be done to help you, improve your score for asset inventory data, for example? Or another question is operational planning and condition assessment. So within these 14 questions, what concrete activities could you do to help you improve? We call these interventions. And one of the neat features of the tool as well, if you're using the Excel version, is it gives you these lovely charts that, that show your current score, which is a light blue, and your target score. So those are great to be able to show to the council and to show your progress so that you can see how you're moving. And these automatically get displayed. So the interventions, as I mentioned, is the last part of the tool. And it is the most critical part at the end, because what the intervention process does is it identifies what your problem is, then what needs to be done and how can it be done. And then the assessor is responsible for looking at what things could be done quickly. So if it's an asset register, what things could you do very quickly that would certainly improve the quality of your information and the amount of information you have? And then what are those strategic actions? What need to take a little bit longer and perhaps might need a bit more support? And so these are documented in the assessment, in the diagnostic tool. And depending upon how the assessment is done, a report could be prepared that would clearly identify what those interventions are and how you get to move along towards that target score. Which then brings us to the asset management action plan. Oh, pardon me, I just forgot one slide. So the implementation process, identify the assessment type. Do you want to just do it as a health check, or do you want to have someone come in and do an assessment? Do that self-assessment. Ideally, you want to have a focal person that's appointed by the organization to act as a coordinator. Part 1 gets completed. The on-site assessment team comes. They interview the key stakeholders, and then the evaluation is done. And a profile is then provided by the team. So these are sort of how the steps connect into each other, which, because I was excited to get to this part, brings us to the asset management action plan. So what is an asset management action plan? Take note, because this is part of our certification process. If you remember, Daniel mentioned yesterday, and he'll be speaking a little bit more on this when I'm done this particular session. But creating an AMAP is part of that certification process and getting your certificate for participating in these overall workshops. But what is an AMAP? Well, how many people or how many organizations that are here today have had an AMAP or have started working on an AMAP? Let's take a look. Do we have anybody? I think we have a poll that should pop up. Yes. So have you, if you have had the diagnostic tool, have you started to write an AMAP with the help of your UNDASA or CDF consultant, so Mohan or Bihanji? Some of you have. I noticed a couple of you referred to your AMAPs in the chat. So I know some of you have. Now we've got about 12 municipalities that have. Oh, it's going up. 18. So about 25 of you, which is excellent. Okay, well, we'll stop our poll just so you can get a sense. So some of you do have, and have gone through the process of the diagnostic tool and are working on your action plans. So what I'm going to be talking about will be a refresher for some of you, and for others, it will be new information. So our action plan. So the AMAP, in a way, is that route map that helps you improve on what you're doing in terms of asset management. So for example, if you decide you want to build a new market, it takes you through the steps of how you determine what the current situation is and the activities you might need to take. You know, what is wrong with your old market? What are some simple things that you can do work towards building that new market? And then what are all the things you need to consider to put that new market in place? And if you can't build that new market, what are other options that you could think about? So this is what we want to look in the AMAP. And it gets you thinking about the life cycle of that. It helps you develop a sound plan for addressing deficiencies in some of your assets. It'll link those proposed improvements to sort of current and your medium, your current and your medium or long-term government budget. And so there are 5 steps that we're going to look at, okay, in the AMAP. And you can see where the guidance from the asset management diagnostic tool will come in when we get to step 3 and step 4. So let's start down our AMAP journey. Step number 1. We talked earlier about an asset management framework or a policy. Well, if you don't have an asset management framework or a policy, that could be part of your AMAP. If you don't have a strategy or a plan, that could be one of the actions that you want to do, because the very first step is establishing that policy or the framework. Now, that's an awful lot to do in a short period of time, and it's not necessarily going to help one of your individual assets. It takes a long time to establish that strategy or that plan. So how could we use our AMAP to perhaps start on that, but keep working on one of our assets? Well, the AMAP tools come with a writing guide and an AMAP template. And the writing guide gives you examples of what to do and how to implement the AMAP. And the template gives you examples, or the template puts the text there for you. So really all you have to do is fill out the charts and fill out the tables. And one of the very first steps are defining perhaps your asset management principles. And so within the AMAP template are a series of principles. So do you remember we talked, our very last exercise in our last session was about our objectives. So here we have 4 possible objectives of sustainability. We'll take an integrated approach, customer focused, and you can see some of the principles that will go along with that. So within your AMAP gets you thinking about those principles. And there's 5 to 8 principles really that you would want to focus on. You don't need 20 principles because that's too many. So within the AMAP template, there are 15 to 20 principles that you can choose from, or you can pick your own. But it gets you thinking about that first step of developing your asset management framework. The next step is looking at stakeholders, and this is a big step. We're looking at stakeholders, we're setting performance goals for our priority asset. So what is involved in this step? We're going to look at each part of this. First of all, priorities. How do we identify that priority asset? Because the AMAP is meant to be an action plan for one priority asset. Well, the first thing we want to look at is what vital function does that asset support? And here's an example of 4 vital functions. And the next thing we look at is that risk. What is the impact of service disruption? So if we didn't have that vital asset and the service it provides, what would the impact be? And if that impact is significant, then that is our vital asset. If the asset we've picked perhaps only has a moderate impact or no impact if we don't have the service, then we need to rethink whether or not that is our priority asset and go through that exercise again. Once we've done that, we need to identify our key stakeholders. Who are the people that are involved in managing our assets, both internal and external? And here's an example, as you can see on our slide, of some internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Why do we care about our stakeholders? Because some stakeholders have power and influence over what we do, and some have a really strong interest in what we do. And so we need to manage those stakeholders. We need to keep them satisfied and provide them with information so that we keep them engaged. And if they're one of our external funders, we want to make sure that we are demonstrating accountability and transparency and responsibility for what we're doing. The final step is to identify our performance goals. And we talked about performance goals yesterday. And the template and the writing guide take you through how you do that in more detail. Okay? So if our priority asset is solid waste collection, and our goal is to provide solid waste management on a daily basis, we've decided that that level service is to collect our waste and transport it to a dump. How do we measure if we are meeting that level of service? And these are the performance targets we talked about yesterday. And remember, they had to be SMART targets, very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So we've got our priorities, we've got our stakeholders, we've got our assets, our goals. We then look at what current methods and technologies we're using to manage our assets. Maybe there's a deficiency there, and this is where the feedback from the diagnostic tool comes in, because that could have been identified in your diagnostic tool assessment. So what we have, there's some common methods and processes that you might use, or some common tools. You might use capital planning, or have an asset disposal method process, or a condition assessment process. Is there a gap in that? Perhaps there is, perhaps there isn't. And what tools do you have? Perhaps you've got things you want to do, but you can't do it because you don't have the right tools to do it. So this is step 3 in our AMAP. Then we move into step 4. So we know what our asset is, we know who our stakeholders are, we've identified our goals. So here we have our goal. We decided our goal was going to be deliver basic water supply to 90% of our community. And we suddenly realized it only reaches 80% of our community. Do you remember yesterday we did that exercise and we asked, why was that happening? So we have a gap here. Why do we have a gap? Is it because we have underserved areas and we need to fill the gap, we need to identify who those areas are? Maybe it's a level of service problem or a capacity issue. Maybe we just don't have the right information. So we ask ourselves the question, so what? These are Linda's 2 other most favorite words, so what? Okay. If we aren't really reaching the community, so what? What do we need to do? Well, we've got a gap. We need to identify these areas, so what? That leads us to our actions. So what are we going to do to fill this gap? So this is step 4, is doing the gap analysis, where we identify those improvements to meet, or we identify what our gaps are, and then what improvements do we need to take to meet our goals. Then finally, we come to the plan. This is pulling it all together. And this is where we want to look at, what are those quick things that we can do in a fairly short period of time, within 6 months, that will have the biggest impact? What resources do we need to do? And let's set realistic completion dates. So it's not about what we need to do, it's who do we need to make it happen, and how are we going to do it, and when are we going to do it by? Okay? And what we have here is a quote from one of the AMAPs that was created by one of our municipalities when we did our workshops. Their highest priority actions are based on things they can accomplish quickly, and they're practical and have an immediate impact. So we've gone through this logical approach to creating our asset management action plan. As I've mentioned, there is a template and a guidebook to help you with this. And the template has these 7 sections to it. So there's an introduction, it talks about your policy framework, which in a very simple version of an AMAP, you just identify your principles, setting your goals, identifying the methods, doing that gap analysis, and then coming up with that plan. And then the final step, which is so important, is the follow-up and review. Just like having a strategy, just like having a strategic asset management plan, there's no point writing it if you're not going to make it happen. So how are you going to do that? So if I can summarize the process, if you're going to write your AMAP, it's important to appoint a focal person. That person is going to be your champion that's going to make sure you go through the process. We write that draft AMAP, go through those 5 steps, consult with those key stakeholders, come back, revise your AMAP if you need to, and then have it approved by senior leadership so that it can be seen to be supported. Remember, one of those things was awareness and senior leadership buy-in. Well, it is equally important to have that for your asset management action plan, or you will struggle to get things done. So we've very quickly gone through the diagnostic tool and the AMAP. We're going to have another breakout session now. And the aim of this breakout session is to get you to think about what your priority assets are, so that when you go back to your municipalities, you'll have already done that exercise. You'll have looked at a priority asset. And I realize that in your breakout rooms, you're from many different municipalities. But if there are 2 or 3 people here from a municipality and you go back, you'll have done this exercise and you can come together and think about what your asset might be and compare what you chose. So this is the question for you in your breakout room. Okay? You are to discuss what you think is a priority asset. Once you have picked an asset, answer these 2 questions. What vital function does it support? Is it health and safety? Is it security, economy, social well-being? It could be something else. And then think about what is the impact if you didn't have that asset and it didn't deliver that service. If you say, yes, there is a significant impact, then you have validated that that is your priority asset. And again, we have a form for you to fill this out. So you'll go through this. And if you identify an asset and then you say, what is the impact of service disruption? You go, well, actually, now that we're discussing it, there's not much of an impact. Then start again, pick a different asset. So same process that we've done with all of our other groups. Select a rapporteur, discuss the question. I'll be leaving it up here on the screen. Fill in your form. Please put the name of your rapporteur on the form. In the last exercise, there was some really good answers, but I didn't know who to call on to report on what was done. So please make sure you put the name of that person in there so that we can share the really good responses I know we're going to get. So we're now going to go out into breakout rooms again. This is our last breakout session. And as I've mentioned, this is you can use this as an opportunity to start thinking about that AMAP and what might that priority asset be if you write an asset management action plan. All right, do we have everyone back?
They're on their way back, Linda.
They're on their way. All right, good.
All right, we're good to start again.
Great, thank you so much. Well, it was interesting to follow and look at what your priority assets were. As I was going through the responses, a lot of you identified roads as your priority assets. So I would like Lisa Ramos from Breakout Room 11 to, if you could unmute yourself, Liza, and share with us what your group decided and why you decided that was your priority asset.
Okay, so Breakout Room 11 actually decided to choose specifically roads. And we said that since now everyone can relate to healthcare services, we specifically chose access roads to to hospitals and health facilities because we really believe that this is an important asset, a very critical one, especially at this time of the pandemic. So while we're discussing about the roads, I also identified the vital functions that it supports, and we said that most of the functions of a city is actually being supported by this asset, no? But we've identified specifically health and safety, security, and development in general. And as to the question of the impact, in case there is a disruption in this service, we said that there will be a significant impact because if the road is inaccessible going to the hospitals and other health facilities, we know that there will be a major disruption and a bigger problem in terms of the social well-being of the community.
Well, thank you so much for that response. It sounds like you had a very, very good discussion. And I was very interested to see how you mentioned the pandemic, because my question back at you would that still be your priority asset if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic? Did you have any discussion about that within your group? I'm putting you on the spot here, I know.
Oh.
Go ahead.
There you go. We actually did not discuss about the pre-pandemic or post-pandemic
Okay.
scenario, but actually what we discussed is that we want to select road in general to be the asset that will input in the Google form. And then there comes the discussion of prioritizing healthcare services because of what we are experiencing right now.
Right. And so within the context of the roads, those roads that provide access to healthcare services are a higher priority than perhaps roads that might provide access to other services due to the current situation.
Correct.
Excellent. I'd like to call on breakout room number 9 and a mascot. If you could share, you did not choose roads, and so that's why I'm picking you. If you could share what your priority asset was and why. So breakout room number 9, Muscat.
Thank you. I just tried to unmute myself. My name is Maksat from breakout room number 9. We choose it. What was there? A water supply facility as an asset. Our pipes or our water pumps in our community. We agree that this is one of the most important assets for our community, and the function actually is quite straightforward and simple: the delivery of fresh water to our community, and the impact of disruption of this asset would be actually lack of water and sanitation, which can lead to diseases and all this bad situation with the water and sanitation in our community. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us. And I'm really interested. I'm looking at what the discussion that's going on in the chat, because I think it must be, it's very difficult to think about one priority asset. I'm sure you had quite a discussion about that, because so many of our assets are critical to what you do that, you know, yes, this exercise had that point to get you thinking about what your priority asset might be to develop an action plan for that asset. But the other benefit of it is to make you realize that sometimes it's hard to prioritize what those assets are, because so many of them are critical to the vital functions that are and the services they provide within our community. So if when you do go back to your communities and you start on this process, and if you choose to do the diagnostic tool and implement it in your community or your municipality, and work on your AMAP, you've already started that discussion by what we've talked about here in this breakout exercise. So thank you very much for sharing. I had, I think as I was reading the forums, I mean, I cut off at about 17, but I think more than half of them had roads. And in fact, roads are key to economic development. If we can't get goods to market, then we can't get revenue in to our municipalities. And all you have to do is be in an area where you lose a road because it's been washed out because of flooding or whatever, and you realize how important they are. But our water distribution systems, if we don't have clean and safe water, then we have disease. We have cholera and typhoid and dysentery. And if we don't have sanitary distribution systems, then what happens? Our hospitals are so critical at this point in time. So you could, and the equipment that's in them. So you can see it can be a real challenge to identify what that priority asset is. But one of the advantages of the tools that we've developed is that they have a two focus. First of all, when we talk about what we've looked at in this session, is do the diagnostics, understand what that problem is, which is the diagnostic tool that helps you understand what your problems are, where your areas of weakness are. And once you've done that, you create the plan to solve the problem. Once we know what our problem is, we need to solve that problem. And the AMAP takes you through that process that will help you do that in a logical, supportable way, so that you can prove to funders that you have a good plan for managing your assets. There's no point developing a new market if you don't have a plan for how you're going to maintain that market. If you develop a market and you get funding for that market because you have a good plan for it, then you will continue to get revenue for that market, because you know that you have to manage it over its life cycle. You've looked at the performance goals and performance measures you need for that market and how you can continue to get that revenue. And when you have funders that are providing you, whether it is a municipal loan, whether you are, whether it is a grant, if they see that you have a viable plan, then they have confidence that their investment in that market is going to bear out. So we've talked about a lot in the past 2 days. And again, I will keep coming back to the point that asset management isn't a one-time exercise. So being a part of this workshop is not just coming to the workshop. It's just starting your journey. We've looked at asset management and we've looked at the basics. We've talked about the 6 fundamental questions of asset management. We've looked at the asset's life cycle and why we need to consider assets from cradle to grave. And I was so excited to hear our speakers at the start of today talk about that it's so important to understand the operation and maintenance of that asset, and not just the new construction, because that's where all of our costs go. We've looked at a framework. How do we get it done? What helps us implement asset management, and what do we need to move forward? And then finally, we've looked at the AMAP. What is the plan to solve that problem? And how do we come up with a good plan? And the AMAP is a tool that can help you do that. So what's next? I'm going to hand it over to Daniel now to tell you where you go from here, and where further support is available for you as you carry on your asset management journey. So thank you so much for your attention. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Linda. Perhaps we can all give a round of virtual applause and real life applause to Linda for doing an excellent job yesterday and today. Thank you so much, Linda.
You're welcome.
Clap. This is, over here it's rather late, and I'm always astonished how much energy Linda still has when everyone else seems to be getting more tired. She seems to be getting more active and more energetic. So this is great. Now let me please just steal maybe 2-3 minutes of your time, and then we're done. What are the next steps? If our colleagues from, if you could put on the slide with the dates. I think there's 2 slides and one. I'm not sure if, well, there it is, yes. Sorry, I have so many windows open, I can't even see it myself anymore. So this was the first round of workshops. It was the introduction to asset management, and it was a very, very brief overview over the tools of asset management that are introduced in our handbook in chapters 3 and 4. In order for you to get the certificate for this entire course, there are 2 more rounds of workshops. So you've completed the first round, and the second round will be on data for effective asset management information systems. That will be on 16-17 of March. This is a crucial course for all of you. We've seen that in the field that a lot of demand is for assistance on building proper asset registries and organizing the data the right way and turning it into useful information. So I urge you all to come back to that workshop, not only because it's necessary for the certificate, but also it's a very crucial topic. And then finally, 6-7 April, almost another month later, 3 weeks later, there's our workshop on crisis resilient asset management, where we'll focus mostly on climate change and similar natural disasters and external shocks, and how they can be dealt with through better asset management, how they affect asset management, and also how we can use asset management to respond to them properly and effectively. So these are the next dates. Since you have already registered for this round, you've automatically registered for all of the other rounds as well, and you have reserved a spot in them. And we will remind you, of course, when the date approaches. In the meantime, we would like you to get started on one assignment. It's the only assignment out of this first round. Data and crisis resilience will have separate assignments. We want you to start writing your own asset management action plan, or AMAP. And there is an AMAP template available on our website, and we will send you an email with all the information. There's also an AMAP writing guide available on our website. Those documents are available in multiple languages, including Nepali and in Bangla. And please take a look, download it, and start filling it out. You can use the template as a document, as a basis for your AMAP. Everything is already there. The structure is there. You just need to follow the structure and apply it to your priority asset. Please, when you're done, send it to us. Send it to, in this case, Bidan and Mohan have been our consultants. In the email that we'll send to you, we'll share with you again the right contact information. Once you're done with the assignment, send it to us. We'll look at it and we'll see if there anything else needs to be done with it. If you have any questions, please respond to our email that we'll send to you after this workshop. So that is the assignment. So please sit down, do it. It's not only good for the certificate, but it'll be good for your local government to have an asset management action plan for your priority asset in place. It's the real start of your asset management journey. Also, short, mentioning of our handbook again. The handbook is being translated right now into many different languages, and hopefully very soon we'll have the first 4 chapters available in Bangla, Nepali as well as other languages like Spanish and French. If you want more information on the handbook, you can of course download it, visit it, or just send an email to the address down there, iamh@un.org, which stands for Asset Management, Infrastructure Asset Management Handbook at un.org. So please email any one of us. You can also ask whoever you were in touch with to get my email address. Yes, please be in touch. Don't be strangers, as we say here. And I hope you got something out of these workshops. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the night, rest of the afternoon, rest of the morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is goodbye for now. Thank you.